Hi, and welcome to my April TBR. Isn't quite right, more like a April reading plans or on my radar, because I have a lot of books I want to read this month. For the majority of the month, I'll be participating in the Trans Girl April Readathon hosted by Sess Kevy. And this was one I actually hadn't planned on participating in, at least not for the entire month. But when I started to look at the books that I wanted to read by a variety of trans and non-binary authors, I realized there was a lot. I have too many to sort of narrow it down. Usually each month I try to figure out which ones are most exciting to me, and to be honest, they're all kind of pulling to me. And I figured, why not, sort of broaden the TBR this month and give myself just a full suite of books to pull from. And there's no obligation to finish all of them, just the ones that are calling to me throughout the month. That said, before I get into those, there are two James Baldwin books that I want to talk about that I'm reading for the James Baldwin Readathon that I'm participating in with Ashley from Lucas Realm and Erica from Lucas Bond, who's hosting it. I last month said I was going to be reading Notes from a Native Son and A Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. I have not done that yet. I technically could fit it in this month, but I realized we're having these monthly lives about the end of the first week. At least this first one's going to be tentatively planned for the end of the first week of April. And it may end up getting moved back. And to be honest, I would rather not read these books more than a week in advance. So I figured I'm going to sort of shift my TBRs each month off a month, sort of out of sync with the actual readathon, and read them like right as I lead up to the live shows that are going on. So instead of giving you what is technically April's reads for the Baldwin Readathon, I'm going to give you last month's reads, where I'm going to finish them probably the first week of April, depending on when we exactly nail down the first live show for that readathon. My TBR then for April, my Trans Girl April Readathon started out with a TBR where I'm just, I want to read some horror books by some trans authors. And I'll have a week dedicated to that. And then I started finding books by trans authors that I realized I really want to read, that I haven't gotten to lately. But the original idea was I'm going to spend a week reading trans horror. And now I don't know if it's going to work out that way, because of the books that are on this list I'm going to show you, I'm probably more interested in all the horror than I am the non-horror. Meaning I could end up doing just a really long reading vlog while I'm reading nothing but trans horror. We will see how that plays out. But for now, I'm going to start with the books that are not horror, and then give you just the full list of all the horror I'm considering reading. First one that is not horror is going to be Sovereign by April Daniels. And this is book 2 of a superhero YA series featuring this young trans girl, who basically gets the powers of a Superman-like character. It's this traditional superhero story, but through the lens of what it means to be trans, dealing with trans issues in that sort of environment. I thought the story was really fun and also really reflective on that kind of experience, and it's really interesting. And honestly, I'm really excited to read this. I'm not usually big on YA books, especially YA speculative, but I thought this was well done. I actually think this is going to be a fun read for sure. Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. And this is this is a sci-fi space story. I don't think it's YA. I think at first I thought it was, but I'm actually more excited for the fact that it's not YA, despite what I said about Sovereign. And this is one that hasn't really been on my radar before this month, but I've just heard so many glowing reviews about it that I kind of how do I not do that? I actually already requested it on Libby. I actually got it granted today, but I ended up pushing it back for 2 weeks. But I feel like, given that I'm almost certainly guaranteed to get it granted on Libby, plus all the hype, there's a good chance that this and Sovereign are 2 books that I'll definitely get to outside of the horror readathon. Outside of the horror section of the month that I'm focusing on. Okay, next up, Ginger Trouble by Judith Butler. How did I come across this book? I think I was reading on Reddit or something. People were talking about, no. I remember now. I was watching a review for a different book on a book olive, I think it was, and she mentioned in passing Judith Butler as like a better example of someone who dissects these ideas. I'm like, I recognize that name, but I've never looked into it. And come to find out, Judith Butler is a philosopher who talks about gender identity, and I think was one of the first authors to do so in the early 90s, first challenging the idea of gender norms. And I had no idea. I say no idea. I clearly had some idea in the sense that I recognized the name, but I never really knew much about their background. And I'm really excited to explore this in Trans Girl April. It's a perfect opportunity to explore the issues with the gender norms and how some might not quite fit in there, myself included. Okay, next up, This Is Me by Alexandra Billings. You know, I say I'm prioritizing my horror reads, but to be honest, as I read each of these names out, I'm realizing these are all books like I want to read right now. And the only reason I haven't is because it's not technically April yet. I want to save it for April. This Is Me by Alexandra Billings. I adore Alexandra Billings. I really do. When I think about my, just journey in my queer experience as a queer person, as a bi person, and someone who is being that they don't quite fit on the gender spectrum, it all started, I think, with Transparent, seeing her and others on that show, and all that has been sort of tainted by Jeffrey Tambor. It's one of the few shows that I'm likely to return to in spite of that, because of the overall message and because of the amazing cast like Alexandra Billings that was featured. That was when I first got exposed to her. I've gotten to follow her quite a bit more. I follow her on TikTok. She's very kind and she's very interactive, and she's just a lot of fun. She seems very kind and genuine. This is a book that I remember wanting to read. For whatever reason, it sort of went to the back of my mind. I forgot about it. And then I was browsing Kevy's channel. I saw a review from like months ago about this book, and I realized, oh shit, this is what I want to read. I'm really excited for this. I adore Billings. I really look forward to reading about her life and her experience here. Next up is Dear Cintherin by Akwakia Mezi, a surefire 5-star book. Almost certainly I've never had a book by them that I haven't loved and adored. Nevertheless, of these books, this is the last of the non-horror books. I think I would put this one last, not because I don't want to read it. Right now, it's like not the book that's pulling to me the most, and I feel confident I'll get to it at some point soon. It's one of those things where I guess because I love Akwakia Mezi, I don't see myself needing to rush through their backlog or their catalog of books when I know I'm going to catch up with their publishing timeline eventually. Now on to the list of trans horror books here. I don't know if I have these ranked. 7 books, and in the last several months, I think I've read 5 or 6 books a month. So am I going to get through these? No. That's why I sort of want to limit this to a week, maybe 2. I think on a good reading pattern, at least in the past, has been 2 books a week. So if I can fit 4 of these in 2 weeks, I guess that's good. Maybe 5, we'll see. I'm getting ahead of myself. I haven't even told you these books. Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This is maybe YA horror, I'm not sure. This has to do with, I think, witches. The YA or YA-esque advertisement, at the very least the cover looks YA. It's just enough about it that makes me probably hesitant to pick it up if it wasn't for all of the praise I've been hearing about it, similar to Light from Uncommon Stars. I've heard about it recently, and I figured why not. And I do love witches, which I'm pretty sure is there. And even if it's not, as long as it's sort of demonish, hellish, I love a good hellish story. Next up, The Drowning Girl by Caitlin R. Kernan, an author who I've been seeing pop up, I think, in Goodreads horror. I actually didn't realize she was trans at the time, and it makes me want to pick up her works quicker than I think I would have otherwise, just because I tend to prioritize books that are queer. Manhunt by Gretchen Feckler Martin. This one, of course, has been all the craze lately because it's one of this apocalypse where people with testosterone are turning into zombies or something of that nature. It, of course, features J.K. Rowling dying off screen. It was just a lot of controversy. I've heard people not love this book because of its graphic nature. I don't necessarily get turned off by that. I feel like it has something to say, and as long as it's saying that with all of that, and even then sometimes I can tolerate it. Hellraiser would be a good example of that. I think it'll work for me. All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes. This is one I don't know anything about. I think I was just looking for examples of horror books by trans authors. One of the reasons I guess we got pulled into this idea of a reading vlog dedicated to trans horror was it wasn't a genre in the trans author community that I had been exposed to much. I read Tell Me I'm Worthless, and I loved that book because it was such a fascinating discussion of the experience of being a trans person and the relationship between TERFism and fascism, and I wanted more of that kind of dissection because it was such a well-crafted book with such heavy themes that really just struck a nerve. I think that book is what inspired me to want to do all of this. Okay, next up, No Gods for Drowning by Haley Piper, a book that I almost read in January, but then I didn't get it granted by NetGalley, so I said, fuck that, I'm not reading it. But now I might. We'll see. This is, I think, a fantasy horror book by an author, Haley Piper, who I've been following on Twitter, but I haven't read yet. So I'm excited to read her books, if not this month, eventually. Next up, Drowning Blood by Poppy Z. Bright, a name that I'm stating because all of his works are published under this name. Even his website uses that name. But he has since come out as a trans man in the last, I think, 5 or 10 years, maybe even more, maybe it was 2009, ever since he stopped publishing. The point is that it's important to note he has changed his name, he has changed his pronouns, and I see this name as more of, a pseudonym that he wrote with. But anyways, Drawing Blood is a vampire story. This is another one where I was looking for trans horror, and this was a classic that came out from the 1990s, and I'm not that thrilled by another vampire story, but it seems to get a lot of praise, and I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt because it seems to be a classic book within the trans horror genre. And then lastly, things have gotten worse since we last spoke. Other stories by Eric LaRocca, who I believe is a non-binary author, and this is effectively a set of horror short stories. It has a gorgeous cover. I think once I realized the author was non-binary, I figured it worked great for this month because it was one that I had already been immensely intrigued by. It's pretty short, so it shouldn't be a difficult thing to read. I'm hoping it'll pack a punch. That cover is very exciting. This is very intriguing. And then there are actually a couple more that I'm not going to mention, but there were a couple more memoirs I wanted to read. I'm realizing this was the month of memoirs, so I decided to curtail it because it wasn't the thing I'm most interested in right now. I already have enough memoirs, I think, on my TBR for the time being. But those are the books I plan on reading in April. Let me know if you're participating in the Trans Girl April Readathon. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time on Josh's Bookish